From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 Studios in New Orleans, it's the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I'm Vasilios. That is Sean Fazende. Remember to like, subscribe, rate, and review. You guys can find us wherever you listen to and watch your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the little bell button right there. You get notified every time we upload a new podcast. Woo! Sean, happy Friday to you.
What a week it has been.
Very eventful week after the NFL regular season. We're seeing coaching moves, and that's kind of what we're going to be touching on today. But how you doing today, my man?
I'm doing good. Good week. Looking forward to a weekend of wild card fun.
Super wild card weekend.
Saints will not be in it, but
that's what makes it fun.
And there are reasons for that. So we're going to get into that today. But yeah, it's been a great week. It's been a fun week. A lot of news happening. We're going to continue sort of our Saints offseason recap. We're going to blend in some big news from the coaching icons around the NFL and college football as well. But as we always do, Sil, we got to keep it local, but we're going to go local, big picture. How are we starting it today?
All right, so big picture. Let's talk about the coach that matters right now, and that's head coach Dennis Allen right here of your New Orleans Saints. Sean, let's kind of get into it because last podcast we talked about the quarterback.
Yeah. Let's
talk about the performance of Dennis Allen over the course of his second full season in New Orleans.
Yeah, well, first I want to start with this because, we go through these topics, we set them up, you kind of set me up, I go through my reasons, but I want to know, because I heard you a little bit on the radio Thursday, where were you at with DA's performance this season?
I know we've discussed this a little bit before. I think he's a player's coach, or at least tries to be. But I think for the most part he's not. I think it's fair to say that he's not as discipline heavy as the previous Saints coach. Am I wrong in considering that?
Yeah, and I'm going to get to that in just a second. So, but I wanted to get your sort of feel on it because I have no scientific poll to conduct.
Sure.
But I would imagine if you were to poll the fan base right now, if they would have pulled the plug on the Dennis Allen experiment, a lot of people wouldn't just be okay with that. They probably would have celebrated that. But like I've said many a times, it's not what the Saints do. Look, he gave them enough reason to get rid of him. They decided not to do it.
Sure.
He will be back in year 3 with the Saints. So with that information, let's get into the sort of reasons for, why we're even having this debate when it comes to Dennis Allen. They won 4 of their last 5, but missed the playoffs. But they won 4 of the last 5. So that's a good thing. That's a positive thing. But they needed 4 of the last 5 to even have a chance at the playoff discussion. That's a bad thing. On the field. We're going to go on the field and then off field / day-to-day routine. But first, on the field. The big issue for Dennis Allen came from inconsistency and preparation. That goes all the way back to, it falls on the feet of the coaches. Motivation and game planning. Motivation and game planning. A 9-8 record, so we know that.
Yeah.
5 of the 8 losses. 5 of the 8. They never led at any point in the game. That's a crazy stat. 5 of the 8, think about that, they never led at any point in the game. That is far too many games where you're behind the 8 ball and playing catch-up. Repeated slow starts all goes back to motivation and preparation, as we mentioned. Were you truly prepared for what was coming? Were you truly motivated for what was coming? Were you truly ready to go, or did you just think you were ready to go? If you're starting that slow, that often, clearly there was a disconnect. So to me, on the field, it really boiled down to preparation. And that preparation at times looked fantastic because on the flip side, there were some games where they never trailed.
Right.
And then there were other games where they never led. And I did feel like at times this team could not deal with success well. They got too happy. They got too happy. They got too complacent. They kind of thought they had it. And every single time they got to that point, it's not hard to figure out when, after every 2-game win streak, they lost. They lost the following, after every single one, except for the following, because the season ended. So it's not hard to figure that out. So when your team was up, they didn't have the attention and focus to stay up. Now, when your team was down, they tended to battle back and deal with the adversity. So maybe that's why, in the grand scheme of things, other than the fact that they're the Saints, they don't change often. They don't like big changes unless they're forced to do it.
Sure.
Maybe that's the argument for him.
Look,
Fine.
I'm with you on that, and it's just we've seen what Dennis Allen's able to do, and I mean, this past season, again, we talked about this.
Yeah.
One of the easiest schedules you're ever going to face in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you still have to go out and win games against really good football teams. This is the NFL. No game is a gimme, but this is as much a gimme as you will ever see.
Absolutely. In NFL terms, this is as easy as it's going to get. Both division and schedule. Continue.
No, and looking at the last 2 seasons, not just this one, they finished above 500 this time, but your 2 years as a head coach in New Orleans is 16-18. That's by definition subpar, mediocre.
That's mediocre, subpar, which would be an upgrade for what he was, obviously, in Oakland. If you're just going by,
but a lot of people don't want to take that into account. But I think you should, because it tells it. Just these past 2 years doesn't tell the whole story. 2 years, 4-12, and then then your third season in then Oakland, you were fired after 4 games. So your total coaching record is 24-46.
Yeah.
Dennis Allen is a very good coach. This is my unbridled opinion right now. Very good coach, maybe an average to below average head coach. I don't.
That's all fair. That's all fair.
I'm just going off the numbers here.
Yeah.
Like this is not even me just being opinionated. This is just me backing up my stuff with fact, right? But I think he has the pieces around him, at least player-wise. They need to figure out the personnel, but the player-wise right now, we saw at moments what they could do when they're firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, absolutely. And why couldn't they do that on a consistent basis? That's why, I am on the record as saying, if it were up to me, it would have been playoffs or bust this year. And if the Saints would have went in that direction, I would have said, look, he had his opportunity. It didn't happen. This was as easy as it's going to get, and the best they got was 9-8. Not good enough. Not good enough. They're going to give one more shot, which was the least surprising thing, because I just felt like once they got to 8 wins, he was going to come back. So that's on the field.
Yep.
Preparation, motivation, being ready to go on a consistent basis, being professional. Now, there is the debate out there. Did he lose the locker room? By just that statement, purely the definition of that, did he lose the locker room? No, he didn't. Because I have been in locker rooms where it has been lost, and they would not have rallied and won 4 out of the 5. You don't have to lose the locker room, though, let me rephrase that. Losing the locker room technically did not happen. But other things happened throughout the season that forced them to be subpar in where they ended up. Like, the deficiency to Dennis Allen wasn't that he lost the locker room. Dissent is going to happen in a long season within a locker room. There's too many guys, too many egos, too many ups and downs in the season. But the former players that called out losing the locker room, they're not wrong in seeing a deficiency. They're just wrong in label. They're just wrong what the label is. It was not a lost locker room, and I feel like that's a dumb debate where we get lost in semantics. DA's downfall to me, deficiency when it came to discipline and details. This team struggled with details and struggled with discipline all season long. It really had a feeling of too loose, lack of accountability. Did you read Jeff Donkin's article?
I did on Thursday when I was on the radio. I read some of the quotes from that, and it was the word used was splintered locker room. Yeah. Obviously, like you said, you're gonna have a little bit of dissent through a long season. But one of the things that stuck out to me was the whole parking situation and I feel like it sounds like such a minor thing, but when you have designated parking for media and other officials, and you have
that's just the general public parking lot, and they got their own gated parking lot.
And
go ahead.
No, some players parking in handicap spaces and everything like that. It's just like, and team officials saying that there's going to be a fix, maybe some reprimanding of the players that are responsible. Just never happened.
Never happened.
According to Jeff Duncan and his sources.
Yeah, absolutely. And that just speaks to a lack of discipline and a lack of details. When something like that happens, you have a perfect opportunity to basically, right or wrong, make an example of someone.
Exactly.
He had multiple opportunities to do that. He didn't do it. So, Jeff Duncan's article, let's go back to that for a second.
Yeah.
The thing that really stuck with me, very enlightening to me, was the delayed buses on game days. Think about that. They were late to get on the ride to the stadium on game day. That means guys weren't ready to go. I mean, that is a shocking level of lack of discipline. I mean, that's a shocking of undisciplined just life of just not being professional.
I wonder if like guys were missing. I'm sure they were missing out on curfews too from nights before.
And obviously every time. NFL game day is serious business. You know, you leave when you leave, you go when you go. I mean, I'm there before the players get there on game day. So I've always just seen they get there at a certain time, whatever the case may be. But like for a delay from the buses to the stadium means not all the players are ready to go at the proper time. That can't happen. That is a shocking level of just no discipline and details on your thing. It's funny because when I read that, I had an immediate flashback because, like I said, I'm on the field pregame. We're doing our show from 10 to 11 Central Time. That's like, so it's always 2 hours before kickoff. So it goes from 2 hours to 1 hour before kickoff. And there were at least 2 times that I remember where the stadium was empty, and I thought to myself, just briefly, it feels like the Saints should be here by now. Where are the Saints at? They're not here. It just feels like they would have filed in by now because normally I'll see them rolling the suitcases. They're coming into the stadium. Right. It's like, where are they? Where are they right now? And I just chalked it up to maybe my timing's off, maybe a different time zone. Maybe it's just maybe I'm just the previous seasons my timing was just off, and this is just normal for them. But no, if they were delayed to get to the game day, it's like the second I read it, I was like, oh, yeah, that did happen. I do remember feeling that way, like, wow, where are the Saints at? They're not here yet. This is a game day, and we're getting closer. I mean, everybody's got a game day routine. You got to warm up. And these guys are pretty religious about their game day routine, especially. I remember Drew was so meticulous about his game day routine. So, late for meetings. Surest sign that things are drifting. It's the lack of precision when it comes to timing on the day-to-day life. The parking lot thing. Now, look, this is just me, life in general, so sorry if I offend some of y'all, but total jerk move to have healthy people parking in handicap spots. 100%. I have never liked that. It has always irked me. It's always been a pet peeve, right up there with guys that don't tip at a restaurant or people that go to a restaurant and stiff the waiter or the waitress. That's just, to me, A, you're parking in the wrong spot, and B, you're parking in a handicap spot. Come on, man. Like, that's just a lack of caring. And none of this stuff, does it make a difference on game day? No, but it's how you carry yourself throughout the week where everything matters. And if you carry yourself a certain way, where you're paying attention to details, you're doing what you're supposed to do, you're putting good karma out there to basically have good outcomes on Sunday. And they didn't lose games because of a parking spot. We know that. They didn't lose games because of a late bus.
But all these details.
But these little details keep falling through the cracks. That is where Dennis Allen is falling short. So, like I said before, he had plenty of opportunities to essentially make an example of someone. And the only person that really lost anything of any significance that entire season, all the ups and downs, all the mistakes, all the inconsistencies, the only person that I felt was truly held accountable for anything was Trevor Penning.
Yep, I knew you were going there.
And that small window in that Thursday night game where Alontae Taylor got benched. Yep. Other than that, I mean, think about that.
We never saw anything for off the field, just on the field. Really.
Yeah. I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
Think about that, how crazy that is. All the inconsistency, we saw the only person to lose their job was Trevor Penning.
Yeah, that's wild.
That really is crazy. So, look, DA doesn't have a choice in 2024. He has to make the playoffs to keep his job. He has to be more demanding with the details. I still don't think he's fully shaken the idea that the locker room still sees him as a defensive coordinator. He has to shake that next year. It should have already been shaken. The second you were the head coach, That should have been done. It should have pivoted into a different mindset, a different responsibility, frankly, a different, I call it attitude when it comes to how things are done. He must understand the importance of accountability. This goes without saying.
Mm-hmm.
This goes without saying, because then you're going to have what you have this season. Details, discipline. Details, discipline. He can't just be comfortable with being football coach, football guy, 24/7. He has to be more in tune with the big picture of this team. You got to be micro details when it comes to game planning, but also macro observant to what's happening with your team. I think the worst mistake the Saints can make is this too, because this would be right up the Saints' alley. Moving the goalpost once again next season. In other words, stick with the mandate of playoffs or bust, regardless of circumstances. Don't talk yourself into it or out of it based off of what may or may not happen based off circumstances. This team, build your team the right way to absorb certain issues and go with it. I think that would be the mistake, to essentially move the goalpost based off what's happening next year. Well, this and that. Well, this. No, make the playoffs or start over. That's what it's got to be. It probably could have started already, but if you're going to give one more year, it has to be this year.
Now, I'm curious, though. If the Saints finish 9-8 once again next year, but they do make the playoffs, does DA get the benefit of the doubt yet again?
He would in that situation. Yep, he would. He would.
Even in
I can promise you he would. In that situation, he would.
That is...
He would.
Something to think about.
We'll go back to check this pod next year if that happens. But he would. He would get the benefit of the doubt in that situation. And look, I don't know that I'm a big DA supporter or a big DA fire the guy. I'm kind of like
in the middle. Right?
I'm kind of like, it is what it is. I knew they weren't going to get rid of him, so my mind just naturally works to the next thing. But I think this has to be the line in the sand. And judging by his tone in his post-season press conference, he says things have to be different, things have to change. He's probably going to have to weed out some guys that have already tuned him out. And it's going to be some mainstays. And it's going to be, the public reaction is going to publicly back the player he's getting rid of. But internally, he has to for his own survival. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's not the vast majority of the guys. Like I said, he didn't lose the locker room because they won 4 out of 5. They rallied. And he challenged them a couple times, and they responded to it. Like, Jawan Johnson comes to mind. He said he challenged him. Jawan responded to it. He benched Alontae Taylor. Alontae Taylor responded to it. So I think the weeding out process is going to include some big names this year. And frankly, if you're choosing the DA route in year 3, then you're basically choosing not just him, but also the subtraction of some guys that have done things here for a long time that have been very productive for you.
And look, it's like I said at the beginning, he's not necessarily the most iron-fisted guy in the coaching family in the NFL.
He's got to be more demanding.
I agree. This next season, if the Saints do continue with Dennis Allen, he can't be afraid to put his foot down anymore. I think
just it.
This is he has to show everyone, and I'm not saying he has to be like a ruthless dictator or anything like that, but you have to show everybody that you are the boss, you are the leader.
That's it. It doesn't have to be this, reprimanding a guy in public, or it could just be, do it with your actions. Okay, he screwed up. He's not starting next week. We'll all notice it.
Yeah.
So he's got to be that way, because honestly, the details and discipline cost this team a playoff spot this year. I mean, that's DA's contribution to an underwhelming, disappointing season. He just lost it when it came to discipline, details, and of course, inconsistent when it came to preparation for games, which, on the surface, that could be a fireable offense, because at the very least, that is your job, is getting your team ready to play week in and week out, and that was not the case.
All right, so the next topic we got here are 3 very detail-oriented coaches that had called it quits in the last 24 hours, or last 48 hours, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
So you got Nick Saban retiring from Alabama, Bill Belichick parting ways with New England, and Pete Carroll parting ways with the Seattle Seahawks.
Talk about a seismic shift. And here we are debating whether or not, what was his career record? 23 and whatever. I don't know, whatever it was. Is coming back to New Orleans, and here are the 3 titans of the industry. I guess you could say Belichick and Carroll both got fired, or they just the run came to an end, and obviously Nick Saban retired. So anyway, 3 icons, and here's why. Nick Saban is the GOAT of college football. Bill Belichick is the GOAT of NFL football. But neither one did what Pete Carroll did. That's win a natty and a Super Bowl. I think who was the last coach to do that before him? Maybe Jimmy Johnson?
Might have been, yeah.
I have to go back and look. That's the mistake everybody seems to make. Hey, he won in college, he can win in the pros, but only very few guys can actually win in college and win in the pros. Pete Carroll was certainly one of them. Belichick, I don't think he's done. I think he wants another job. I think he could go somewhere and coach, which, depending on where he lands, that could have an impact on the Saints, because if he's in the NFC or in the NFC South, I mean, that certainly could have an impact.
If you're looking for a culture change,
he would be the guy. Nick Saban is the one I have the most connection with because he was the first coach I ever covered when I was a student up at LSU. And let me just tell you, the Nick Saban that retired was not the Nick Saban back then. I used to joke about this all the time. The most miserable human being I ever met was Nick Saban when he was number one team in the country, like he had at LSU. It was the first time ever doing that when he was at LSU, number one team in the country. They won the national championship. But that run, he was as miserable of a human being as you're going to find because he was so worried about people getting complacent. The funny story I have is there's that famous story, that famous article that came out where he was so like dialed in at LSU and building it, like you couldn't tell him hi. Like, you couldn't tell him hi if you passed him in the hall.
Oh, no.
Like, he would walk right past you.
Just
And if you did, he would reprimand you. No, you focus on your job. I remember leaving a press conference with him. Again, I was so young. And I was so terrified of him because he was so serious. And when I read that article, I was like, no, that makes sense, because when it was me, him, and two other guys in the elevator, he did not say a word. We all just like looked. It was like he did not say a word. It was like no one look at him. No one look at him. It was like we're in straight down. He walked out, went to his car, and left. But look, there's no mistaking, because before him, LSU was kind of okay with settling, and he really catapulted that program. He realized the talent in Louisiana. He pushed and pushed to get the facilities upgraded to where they needed to be, and they just keep on growing and growing and growing. He was the guy that really woke up the sleeping giant, because LSU was a sleeping giant before, and now look at it. It's a national brand, and he was the guy that started. He put the infrastructure in place for not just him, but also Miles and Orgeron and eventually Brian Kelly, to win big at LSU and become the program that it is today. So I never thought it was going to happen, but here it is. Huge for LSU. I mean, they got the beast of the West is now out of the SEC. So now there's blood in the water. They can go in and really take hold of the SEC here, Brian Kelly and company.
If there's going to be a year to do it, it's going to be 2024 for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's going to be really weird to not have those three guys involved in football, although I do think Belichick will be back at some point. And look, if you're Brian Kelly, this is your opportunity. And I want to see him win, not just one, but a couple natties, because that's what they're paying him to do up in Baton Rouge. So, yeah, Nick Saban, like I said, first coach I ever covered, absolutely terrified me because he was so serious all the time. And, as a young kid, you're like, ooh, I want to make him mad. But, yeah, it was fun. But congrats to all those guys. Hell of a career.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts as we head into Super Wild Card Weekend?
Enjoy the weekend. We'll be back next week. Should be fun. Be curious to see who won Wild Card Weekend, see if there's any upsets, and we'll talk about it next week.
Sounds good. For Sean Fazende, I'm Vasilios. It's been the Fox at Overtime podcast. We'll catch you guys on Monday.